Well, we're coming into the final couple of months in 2025, and just when I think I've got my final slots slotted in for the album of the year, something comes around the bend that really shakes the whole list up. And I should have known, this was one of the wild cards coming into this year. And man, it did not disappoint. So, yeah, let's dive into this one. Pachinko by Moron Police. So, Moron Police is a rock band. I feel like rock bands nowadays always come with an asterisk because I don't think there's too many just straight up rock bands anymore. It's like jazz rock or prog rock and metal rock. And like Moron Police is kind of all of the above in that case. They are definitely infusing prog and jazz and metal to kind of create this almost like life rock, kind of what Devin Townsend was doing with metal with albums like Empath or Key or, Ziltoid and things like that, where it's a much more positive outlook, a lot more in the major tone, and just a lot of fun. So their first two records were much more in a nerd rock, party rock, fun rock. I'm thinking of bands like Ninja Sex Party, something along those lines. Like there was definitely a lot of like funny and silly tracks. I mean, Teabag Your Grandma was one of their big hits up until that point. But really, I think it was with their third record of A Boat on the Sea that really catapulted them into the local zeitgeist, and for me, it was Crash Thompson that really introduced me to these guys. He put out an album review. He said it was one of the best records he had ever heard. And yeah, after one single spin, I knew exactly where he was coming from. This band really showcased they had a promise. They had the potential to be one of the greats, and we were always hoping for something more. Like this album, A Boat on the Sea, came out in 2019, and then the lockdowns happened, and then they unfortunately lost their drummer. Yeah, there was a lot kind of like in the way of Moron Police to kind of continue this kind of legacy that they started for themselves. They did put out a small EP after A Boat on the Sea with A Stranger and The High Tide, and it was great. I had a lot of fun with that, but it definitely left me wanting more, So then it was announced early this year that we are getting more music from them, that they've been working on this for quite a while, that they actually got the drummer, I think from the Dillinger Escape Plan, to help really flush out a lot of the ideas that these boys have been playing with. And this was going to be a fully flushed out concept record. Like A Boat on the Sea was definitely flirting with the concept record idea, but this was going to be a fully fledged like narrative flow, themes coming in and out and reprising, and the whole like a prog rock opus in that case. And so earlier this year, back in the summer, they put out Pachinko Part 1, and I was immediately hooked. Like for me, that became my favorite song of the year, and I just had that thing on repeat. It was like 11 minutes. It was this big epic. There was definitely like two sides to the single track. Like they could have really made this track into part 1 and 2 and had the Pachinko suite be part 1, 2, and 3, because it definitely follows this flow to it. You have the first half where it's all about pack my bags and drive to San Francisco, and then the second half is my name is Pachinko, I sang the flamenco, and it's got these two halves to it. So definitely fell in love with that, and it really provided, like, it got me so hungry for more. And then later on, they did A King Amongst Kittens, which was a lot more aggressive. It was a lot tighter, where Pachinko was definitely more of a prog track. A King Amongst Kittens was much more of a tighter, very almost jazz punk track that had this teeth to it. And then we got Alfredo and the Afterlife, which kind of had a little bit more of that same power and that same punch. And we're starting to get a little bit more of that reprisal of themes. And even though the band is releasing these songs kind of out of order within the track lengths, we are getting a little bit of a narrative flow within these tracks. But for me, it was the Okinawa Sky that really perked my interest, because it was showing the band at a different facet. It was a little bit more stripped down, a little bit more somber, and it showcased that they were able to not only command the track when they're going the balls to the wall, really insane, really aggressive, really hard, they really showcased that, hey, we can actually take this really passionate, very slowed down, much more somber, much more personal track and make it a little bit more oomph, and make it just as engaging, just as challenging, and just as enjoyable as the rest of the music as we've heard it. Now, very, very recently, they also put Waiting Around for You. And yeah, let's actually talk about the record proper, because all these tracks really work in the context of the rest of the album, because it is a concept record and these tracks flow very, very well together. This is one of the things that I particularly love about this record. You can listen to any one of these songs in isolation and have a great time and realize this is a great track. It's very pumping, it's very powerful, it's very emotive, it's very energetic, but having it within the context of the record really solidifies it as being something very, very special, because it really is the flow of this record that makes it just a delight and just a treat. We have the first handful of tracks: Nothing Breaks, Port of Call, Alfredo and the Afterlife, which we've already heard, Waiting Around for You, which again we've already heard, and Cormorant, which really is the first 4 big meaty chunks of this album, and it opens up the album overall perfectly. It addresses all the themes that are going to be reprised throughout the length and runtime of this record. It's just kind of giving us like little bite-sized chunks, but also being very commanding and very powerful. We're giving that same kind of essence and that same kind of energy that we had from A Boat on the Sea, but now it's showing that they are developing their skills, they're perfecting their craft, and they're really coming into their own and providing with some of the most enjoyable music that I've heard in a very, very long time. And I almost feel like they know that they've got something very special and they've got something very, very powerful on their hands, because Nothing Breaks, the very first track, opens up with this heavenly chorus, this very almost ethereal, like the gates are opening up and we're being ushered into this new land, this new area that then brings us into the overall fold. And it's just this perfect way to open up this type of a record, and then from there we go into the Alfredo and the Afterlife and Waiting for You, which are much more powerful and much more punchy. And Alfredo and the Afterlife, as we've already heard, starts off extremely punchy, very quick, very we've got those syncopated beats that really hit you really hard. But for me, it's near the end of the track where all the vocals come in with one of the main themes of the album that will be reprised over and over again, that really makes me want to just start high-fiving all the angels already, and we're only the second track in, and I'm like, holy geez, we're already touching gold here. They're not keeping anything up their sleeves. They're not holding anything back for a big play out. It's like, no, everything's happening right here, right now, and we're all along for the ride. And the same can be said about Waiting Around for You. And man, the playing styles on this record are so friggin' tight. We have everybody from the horn section playing around with the keyboard section, playing around with the guitar section, and everybody's playing so tight and so tight-knit that it's like, man, they are all playing right on beat, they are really friggin' tight. But I want to talk about the ending of Cormorant, because I feel like we haven't quite gotten there yet, and I'm only talking about the first 4 tracks here. But man, that playout is reminding me of something so beautiful from Kai, like the Devin Townsend project, where you have this soaring drums that are almost this wall of sound, but this heavenly aspect that's playing around it. So on the one hand, you have a very aggressive, very bombastic, and very antagonistic sound within the drumming styles of things, but it's paired perfectly with this very ethereal, very angelic soundscape of this massive sound. And this is one of the things that I want to talk about now, and I'll talk a little bit about Pachinko Part 1, is that these boys know when to just let the music be and allow things to build and allow things to grow organically. Even though they're very tight and they know when to cut a song off, they also know when to just let the music go and let the music be to build into something really beautiful and really exciting. And that is what we found at the end of Cormorant. And this is what brings us into the second phase of the record in my mind, with Make Things Easier, which is one of the more beautiful passages on this record. It's a lot more subdued. It's a lot more kind of personal in that case, in the same way that Okinawa Skies does, in that, they're not just blowing down the doors. This allows us to take a breather, especially after the end of Cormorant, to just take a breath, and just kind of enjoy the landscape and just kind of like take it all in before we get into Pachinko Part 1. And we've all at this point, I think, have heard Pachinko Part 1, but man, what a journey. The longest track by far, almost double the length of all the other tracks on here. And it is really a journey. You know, it feels like you're going on a road trip within this. And Pachinko Part 2 kind of continues that flavor, kind of continues that flair. I don't really feel as though we're getting that same kind of high highs that we had for Pachinko Part 1, but man, the landscape that Pachinko Part 2 continues on is still very exciting and very interesting. It's one of the more quirky tracks on here. Like, it's got this really fun jazz groove on it, but it's the ending of this track that really ties the entire Pachinko suite together, because this is the reprisal of one of the main themes that we heard at the beginning of the track and the beginning of the album. And once again, we're reprising it to when it will be reprised at the end. And I know I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but these two tracks, Pachinko Part 1 and 2, once again, the boys know when to just let the music be and let the music just bloom, you know? And that is what I absolutely love about Pachinko Part 2, is when we get to that theme, once again, just to really hammer it home, I'm eating this delicate dish that I can't get enough of. Then I think we continue kind of this third phase with King Amongst Kittens, which we've already heard, Take Me to the City, and Apathy of Kings. And I feel like these next three tracks are kind of a continuation of what we had for the first three tracks, or the first four tracks on this album, where it's punchy, it's grooving, it's got a lot of meat and bones on it. And every time I listen to it, I'm always finding more things to get excited for. And that's one of the things that I love about this kind of a dense rock album, is that every time I sit down and to listen to it, even though I've listened to it 30 to 40 times already, because I can't friggin' get enough of this album, I find something new and I find something interesting to just kind of pull out of the track and just kind of examine, because when they allow the track just to kind of go and allow the song to develop, that's when I'm able to kind of like look at all the different facets that they're playing with. Like, just look at the soundscapes, look at the guitar, look at the keyboards, look at the drumming, and just like let it all wash in. And with each of these tracks, I just feel that wave of excitement. You know, I'm seeing where the theme is coming from. Is it a new one? Is it a reprise? And their ability to wrap all that into these kind of tracks is just outstanding. Then we come into my favorite aspect of this album, the ending of this album. And for me, this is where the album just elevates itself onto the next plane. Up until this point, we have been playing with a really great and really amazing album, like an album for the ages. It's the ending that makes this a perfect album. It starts with Habania as just this really quiet, really kind of taking stock of things. It's a kind of an interlude that goes into Okinawa Skies, which I already talked about. It's got this little bit more of like an 80s synth vibe to it, this little bit of like a new wave flavor that I really appreciate and I really love. But man, it's that dripping brilliance, you know, that really is flourished on this. And then a little bit more of that play out of the Sentient Dreamer that, again, just kind of lets us take stock. This is kind of like the little nap, the little reprieve before we get to the final track, the almost 6 minute, which is Giving Up the Ghost. And this track, man, it is really hard to talk about this track, because it's like, how do you talk about a masterpiece like this? You know, it infuses all of the themes that we have been getting throughout this album, and it ties it all together perfectly. You know, like, it took everything that had come before and had weaved it very, very well together, you know, and I feel like past proggers have done very similar things. You know, I'm thinking of, Arjun Lucassen with Enter the New Real. We've got Fido with Doomsday Afternoon, where the final track really is an amalgamation of all the themes that had come before, but this is its final form. This is what everything has been building towards. And when we get to this final play out, I can't help but get emotional. You know, every time I listen to it, we've been attuned, we've been primed, we've been kind of force-fed these themes, so that now when we see it in its final form, it really is like seeing your kid that you've nurtured and helped grow throughout the lifespan finally go off on their own. You know, it's like the final revelation of what this was always meant to be, and it ties the whole story together. And by the end, I feel like it's an emotional outpour. And half the time, if not 75% of the time, I find my eyes and my cheeks are wet afterwards because of how brilliant and how beautiful this is. So, yeah. I think that only leaves me for my rating, because I think that's about it. The final rating for this record is Pachinko by Moron Police is an absolute masterpiece.
We're not worthy!
Now, I don't give that rating out like candy. The last album I gave that rating to, I think, was in 2023 for Bear Ghost. So yeah, this album I think is going to be a album that we talk about for a very long time. This is an album that will most likely arrive on the pantheon of rock and prog. And it fills my heart with so much joy that sure, we got some massive, massive heavy hitters this year from Dream Theater, from Steven Wilson. We're going to get one from Spock's Beard. We got one from IQ. Here's all these massive heavy hitter, prog legends. And it's these whittle boys, these whittle guys that come out and knock us all out of the park. That's what I absolutely love about the prog landscape nowadays. It's the whittle guys that come out and just shake everything up and say, yeah, this is how music is supposed to sound like. So yeah, this one absolutely gets the note seal of approval. This one is a run, do not walk to go and listen to it. It is an absolute masterpiece. There's nothing I would change off of this record. In fact, the first 2 times I listened to this album in full, there were a few things where I'm really like, oh, I would change this, or I would have worked that out. But the more I listened to it, the more I realized, nah, if I did that, this would actually lessen the quality. And every note on here is perfect. Every single note on here is perfect. So yeah, well done, boys. You got yourself another masterpiece under your belt. I didn't think I would have an album better than A Boat on the Sea, but here we are. So yeah, that's what I've got for Pachinko from Moron Police. If you haven't clued in, I like this album. I like it a lot. But I want to know what you guys think about this record. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, please let me know by commenting down below. And I'm going to leave you there. So I want to thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.